All right, so next in our series of practitioner interviews, we have the Clark County Public Defender, Mickey Weber. And so I want to ask you just briefly, sort of your history, your career path as it has come so far, how long you've been here, and what you do here at the Public Defender's Office.
Okay, well, my name is Mickey Weber, as you said. I've been practicing law for about 15 years. I started out in private practice with my father, Joe Weber, who you met and worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we practiced together for a year. He ran for and was elected to what at that time was the Clark Superior Court number 3, and then I was practicing on my own and taking over the clients that he left behind. At the time was doing primarily civil work with a little bit of criminal defense. Spent a stretch in my late 20s and early 30s as the Clarksville Town Court judge, where I heard misdemeanors and traffic infractions. Left that position, resumed doing criminal defense, and worked as a contract or part-time public defender in order to get back into doing criminal defense after having not been able to work in that field. Simultaneously continued to do family law, did a lot of municipal law at various times. Early in my practice, I represented the Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals for Jeffersonville. At one point represented the Jeffersonville City Council, and then the political winds changed.
As they do.
As they do. Any of those politically hired jobs are subject to change depending on the electorate. And before taking this job, was working part-time as the city attorney for the city of Charlestown. I was offered this position in the summer of last year and started this job in October of last year, so it's been about 8 months. In this job, I represent clients who are assigned to our office, to the Clark County Public Defender's Office, and I also supervise and manage, with the help of the other full-time attorneys and staff, the entire operation of the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We currently have, including me, 4 full-time attorneys, and on any given day, 14 or 15 or 16 part-time public defenders who handle criminal cases and juvenile delinquency cases and represent parents in CHINS actions initiated by the Department of Child Services, and in any of those contexts represent individuals who cannot afford to hire counsel. Okay,
so in your career as public defender or your prior criminal work, do you have a philosophy on, or can you talk a little bit about what your perspective is on the media, how they impact your job, how they impact your clients' lives, what you feel their role should be in the criminal justice system, and anything else you think?
So I guess I can't tell you that I've got a well-formulated and universal theory of the media as it relates to representing clients in the criminal field. What I will say is it has an effect, and whatever you do about it, you cannot ignore it. You have to have some sort of relationship with it or position on it, if only to avoid being surprised by and having no agency, no sort of plan for dealing with it. Now, some attorneys are absolutely committed to trying their case in the media. And media is a much more multifarious thing than it once was. You've got the traditional media, news, print news, TV news, and now you've got social media, and that has so many more forms than it used to. It used to be there was MySpace, now there's Facebook, and now
I remember MySpace. Do you have TikTok?
TikTok is the first social media where I truly feel like an old person.
Fair.
I don't have TikTok, and TikTok clearly not for me, and I don't understand how it works or how it's supposed to work. And I was a bit that way with Snapchat. I have a Snapchat account, but I don't understand it.
Same.
TikTok's the first one I don't even have. Instagram is, I'm familiar with them, but they're clearly not for me. But they're for so many people. They're how people exchange information, how they talk about things, and the stories that show up in the traditional media get circulated on and commented on social media.
Correctly and incorrectly sometimes.
Correctly and incorrectly, and sometimes wildly so. And I think that you've got to, I believe and have tried to, in my cases, anticipate whether or not, and sometimes incorrectly anticipate whether or not there'll be any media interest in a case, and decide whether it's useful, whether it's something that could be to our benefit, or at the very least whether it's going to cause us a problem, and if there's some kind of harm reduction that we need to do. The worst thing is if your case ends up being interesting to the media and you're not ready for it, and you panic and say no comment, and then you look unprepared, like I just did in that answer. But also,
not at all.
But also, that gives the other side the opportunity to shape the story.
Okay.
And once a story has been shaped, I mean, one of the things that's true when you're talking to a jury, and also true when you're talking to the public at large, is it's almost impossible to get somebody to change their mind.
Fair.
If you can get somebody to keep an open mind, then they're still persuadable. But once somebody has made up their mind, then they'll contort themselves in all sorts of ways to fit new facts, new information, new arguments into their already formulated worldview.
Okay.
And so if you let the other side convince in any swath, any percentage of the population that might form your jury, or might be your judge as to what this is, whatever this might be, whatever kind of case it is, then you've created a much steeper climb just to try to get back to neutral, just to try to get back to undecided jurors or an undecided judge. And so I think best not to let yourself be caught in that position, and you try to then figure out which cases are going to be portrayed in the media at all, be of any media interest, because we do 1,000 misdemeanors in a given year, which is more than that, and most of them nobody cares about, nobody knows about. The people whose lives they directly affect, obviously they're important too, but to the world at large, they're of not very much concern. But you try to anticipate the ones that are going to be of concern to the public at large, and have some kind of plan. And sometimes, in some situations, there's nothing good that can come of it, and the plan is to just bear down and be seen to be working hard, but at least you've thought about it and made that plan, instead of just doing it without even having a thought to it and having considered whether or not it's going to be something that you need to think about.
Are there cases, like when you have one, and certainly our students should know that the constraints are different on a defense attorney than they are on a prosecutor, as they've seen before. Certainly there are cases that get assigned to your office that you know are going to command media attention.
Absolutely.
When you see that coming and you put together this plan, do you ever have the occasion off the bat to want to control the narrative and affirmatively contact the media or interact with them more? Or is it, generally speaking, from a defense attorney's perspective, the less I interact with them, the better? It's
often at least not seeking it out.
Okay.
I mean, the thing, and this is a bias in news and media generally, and I don't want to get too far afield, but negative things that make people angry or scared, get more attention.
Yes.
And those are the things that look bad for us generally as criminal defense attorneys.
Right.
If something makes somebody angry or makes somebody scared, it's rarely because of what the state has done in arresting or charging somebody.
And if it happens, it's years down the road that we find out.
That's right. Even the ones where there is some ultimate public outrage about some state action, that's generally not immediately apparent. It's often not what immediately gets said about it. And sometimes if you can absolutely demonstrate that what the public narrative has been incorrect to the point of seeming intentionally incorrect to the point of seeming like a lie, you can quietly get something done that's beneficial to your client rather than have the state authority embarrassed by that.
Oh, for sure.
And it doesn't come up a lot, although it can be incredibly satisfying when it does.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And so your question was, do you ever seek out the media? And I would say rarely. And rarely do we get a chance, in part because the media, the traditional media is plugged in with the police.
Sure.
And if something happens where there's a call out because some horrific crime has occurred, or they believe some horrific crime has occurred, they're on the scene and the police are there, and if it's important enough or sensational enough or seems like it'll garner enough attention, then the prosecutor might be there wearing a jacket that makes them look like they're part of the FBI.
I remember, although I never got a jacket. Never got a
well,
jacket.
And I think you got to have your own made.
You probably, yeah. I might.
Nobody's given us that opportunity. Nobody's calling
Right.
me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure I want them to, but even if I did, nobody's calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning to say we've got a horrific double homicide. You better get out here and talk to
Right.
the news and tell them why it's not as bad as it looks. And there was a really good excuse, and there were a lot of mitigating factors here. Nobody wants to hear that from me.
No.
At that moment in time.
So you're almost always starting from the perspective of damage control, because you don't even get the chance to, or the interest in the case before or at the beginning. So you're talking a little bit before about how you can't unring a bell once something negative has already gotten out. It's really, really hard to change somebody's opinions. It almost seems like there's a duality of that in your perspective, because it's more likely to happen to the public, to the defender.
I absolutely think that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, and again, I know this is about one specific thing, and I keep running off in tangents, but the culture at large is largely, in a way that has not been the truth throughout modern American history, is pro-prosecution, pro-policing, pro the state. And I am not here to make a rallying cry for anarchy. I am pro the existence of a state that functions and has laws.
We'll do the call for anarchy in video number 2.
We'll
Get to that. Absolutely. We'll get to that.
But there is not as much room in American life for skepticism about the police as there once was. Now, that might not be as true this year as it was 2 years ago.
Right.
The George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders, the backlash, at least the heightened awareness about certain kinds of problems with policing as they relate to marginalized communities, minority communities, has improved some. But by and large, and in this part of the world that thinks more rurally than it does, like, even though we're right across the river from Louisville, the mindsets in southern Indiana are more rural than they are urban. Most people think that if you got arrested, you probably did something to have it coming, and if they're there to have a criminal trial, that they're there to convict you. And that's only heightened when it's something that's important enough that they've seen a news story about the awful thing you did, and they've seen the prosecutor say, we're going to pursue justice for this family, or some version of that. I mean, you can craft the statement right now and then just fit it to the circumstances on the day of, because that's something that's evergreen. People want to hear the prosecutor come out and say, well, I know this scary thing happened, and it was horrible and awful, and this bad actor did it, and by gosh, we're gonna prosecute to the full extent of the law and make sure that we get some sort of compensation or justice for the poor victim. And we don't get the chance to do that, and the public doesn't want to much hear us do that. And again, there are outliers. There are specific cases where it's more, where the circumstances lend themselves to more of a, there are two sides to that story conversation.
Fair, yeah.
But by and large, when something awful happens, the prosecutor gets to go ahead and tell the public that your client's guilty. And while the rules are different, and the state has more rules that they have to follow in that regard, they're supposed to avoid doing anything to prejudice the potential jurors in a way that we're not. We're supposed to prejudice the potential jurors and do everything we can without violating any other laws about honesty or integrity or maintaining the integrity of the profession. But we're not supposed to pursue justice in the same way. We're supposed to pursue our client's best interests, is our ethical obligation.
Sure.
That said, the state gets a lot more opportunity to a lot more effectively tell a whole swath of the potential juror population that we got this guy, usually it's a guy, and he's guilty and he did it, and we're going to put him away and make you safe and come vote for me at the next election.
Right.
All of that dovetails and it's part and parcel of the same thing. And so yes, we're on the defensive in almost every sense of the word, in the media as well as in court, and sometimes that just means you keep your head down. Sometimes it means that you stay out of it, or you make non-committal statements, especially when the stuff that you know might very well be confidential. That's where we run into problems.
Or harmful, not your best
harmful.
client's
I know stuff
interest.
about my client that would make you even more likely to
Your toes
convict.
curl, right?
Yeah. If you knew him, you'd already had him in prison by now. Or I know something that might be supremely helpful, but they don't want me to use it, whether it's a mental health aspect.
Fair.
And they're absolutely convinced that they're the only sane one in the room, and I'm crazy for even asking.
Right.
I can't go out and tell the media, or necessarily, it might be, depending on the circumstance, may or may not be able to argue in court. This person's not criminally responsible because they're not mentally capable of being criminally responsible.
Right.
Cannot get out and make that decision and tell the media that.
Right.
And probably nobody wants to. And those are, well, cases where it rises to the level of a viable legal defense are the exception rather than the rule. Now,
We did a unit on that. We've talked about how rare it is and how people think it's, the insanity defense is used all the time and people get...
almost never.
Right.
Now, the cases where there's some intersection between untreated mental health issues and criminal defense is massive. If you took out untreated mental illness and untreated substance addiction dependence,
we would not have jobs.
There'd be one of me.
Yep.
And then I'd have plenty of free time.
Exactly.
And so the difference between having a mental health issue that might be a mitigator, or that might just explain what happened but not excuse it from a legal standpoint, which is a lot of them, and then the very tiny sliver that fall into the I'm going to lodge an insanity defense, is the gap between those two is pretty huge.
So when we talked to Jeremy Mull, he talked about some of those different rules that apply, and he talked about not, being too involved with the jury panel. But he also talked about a new initiative that I had not yet heard of, because currently the law in Indiana is no cameras in the courtroom. Right. But he also said that there's a relatively new pilot program to allow it in some places. And his answer, when I asked him, is that a good thing or a bad thing, was not what I expected it to be. So I want to get what you think about that.
Well, and I haven't thought about it much, and I suppose it was inevitable when they had to start letting there be some kind of video broadcast to accommodate Zoom court over the last 2 years of the pandemic, because they had to make some emergency exceptions to the rules just to facilitate the remote court proceedings we've had.
Right.
And that's been a good thing in and of itself.
Okay.
Now, when we start talking about, well, since it's timely and relevant, the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial that America watched, and I didn't watch it. I couldn't avoid it. Like almost everybody these last.
I have TikTok, so I really couldn't avoid it.
Oh, you
all
really
over.
couldn't.
No.
Evidently, that's what TikTok is for.
Yeah, it is,
maybe.
basically.
But that's an example of extreme transparency. Everybody got to see what was going on, and everybody got to weigh in on it. And I do not think that's inherently a bad thing. I think that situation is a bad thing, and those.
Yep.
But the fact that people get to see how court works, and it's not a star chamber, it's not shrouded in mystery, that's not necessarily bad. Now, and from my own personal experience here lately, we had a jury trial. Well, we've had a bunch of jury trials since they resumed in April. We've been trying a lot of cases.
Oh, I'm sure.
But there was one we had in Circuit 1 that was interesting enough to people that, because it was being live streamed, it was part of the...
I didn't see that.
Well...
Which one was it?
It was Gareth Jones.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say much about him.
Of course.
He's awaiting sentencing.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people around the courthouse watched it and would tell me how they thought it was going. And
see, that's an aspect of media coverage that I didn't anticipate. So while you're in trial, people are watching it and telling you how you're doing. They're giving you feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I mean,
Was that a net positive or net negative?
It's too early to say.
Okay.
I mean, I'll say this. I got a lot of really positive feedback.
Good.
And people who told me that if they were on my jury, they'd find him not guilty in the process of it going on, and then the jury went out for a reasonably long period of time, and then they convicted my client, which it was a serious charge. There's a reason why we were at trial,
right.
and it was not something that it was not as though I had allowed myself to believe there was no chance of that happening.
Sure.
I don't know that it made me any better at what I was doing to think I was doing well. It's not unlike
I see.
It's not unlike any other competition. You ought to compete like you're behind, no matter whether you're behind or ahead. And I
Sure.
don't think it changed what we did or how we did it. But I'd be foolish to think that I could know whether it had any impact on my tone or my attitude or because I can't be certain. Now, I think at worst that's just something we have to learn to live with. That's
Right.
not a big enough knock-on effect to make the difference about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to broadcast these things. But it was a side effect that I had not anticipated
Sure.
or expected. And I do think there's, just from a practical standpoint, it's easier to have the folks that you need to watch it be able to sit here in their office and watch it rather than come up to the courtroom and be sitting there not accomplishing anything else while
Right.
you're doing something that's just a time suck,
Right.
which is a lot of jury trial. I mean,
It's a lot of the practice.
When you're doing stuff, it's intense and it's important both to have a sense of the minutia and the big picture, and it's one of the most demanding things you can do. But then there are swaths of time where you're just sitting there,
Yep.
and if you need somebody to watch something or to be preparing something for you, it's a lot easier to have them do that from the comfort of their office than sitting there in the gallery. So that aspect of it is a net good, a really unalloyed good as far as I'm concerned. As far as the public at large goes, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I tend to come down on the philosophical good of it outweighing any of the practical negatives. I think that the more people can, it's a public proceeding, and by nature, this whole constitutionally has to be, and the reason for it is accountability, is to keep our governmental authorities from overstepping. I was having this conversation with somebody else for a completely different reason about an hour ago, but if you did away with and this is not meant, it probably sounds ridiculous, but if you did away with what public defenders' offices do, it would be about 15 minutes before the government collapsed into tyranny. I mean, you cannot give people the authority, and the same goes for the ability of the public to see it, even though most days nobody's sitting up there watching what goes on, even though most days it happens for the benefit only of the people who are there. The fact that the public at large can see it, has the ability to, the fact that there is an opportunity to be accountable for what we do in the criminal justice system and what the state seeks to do in the criminal justice system, prevents the possibility of the otherwise is a so easy possibility of abuse of that power that it'd be irresistible. And I don't mean that as meant to be an aspersion at our prosecutor or any particular prosecutor individually.
Sure.
But somebody somewhere would take that authority and abuse it because it's too attractive not to. If you had the unrestrained ability to pick who you liked and who you didn't like and put the people you didn't like in jail, somebody's going to take advantage of that. And the public viewing of it keeps that from being possible, and the fact that there are people whose jobs it are to gum up the works keeps that from being possible.
Well, I'll tell you that the public defender of Clark County and the prosecutor of Clark County have the exact 100% same take on that issue. This might be the first and last time in Clark County history that it's word for word identical between the two of you, and I can't think of a better way to end this video. So that's our time. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you think my students would benefit from?
I can't think what it is. I don't know if I've answered any of the questions that relate to your topic, but
Absolutely.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.